okay, so the service charge that's added is the tip.
Right.
Because what does the word additional imply?
Right.
It implies there's a tip.
I'll leave extra.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I'll absolutely, but when you're already charging 20%, listen, it's aggressive.
At Nurserat with Salt-Based Restaurant.
We're doing over-under when that place becomes available.
And even relocated from Turkey, classifying kitchen staff as managers in order to avoid paying overtime hours.
Saw that case. I saw that one. Yeah. The top down. I think first thing that every server and every restaurant should disclose to server day one exactly where their money goes. Excited about what law will be passed with, this whole service.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I'm going to read off verbatim here the information I was able to extract from individuals involved with the bill, which is
an all-new episode.
No politics.
No one is talking about this.
No politics.
What? No politics?
No politics.
What
Yes.
about?
So, guys, Felix Bendersky joins the podcast today. And Felix is the founder of F+B Hospitality Brokerage, which is one of Miami's top commercial brokerages that specializes in the restaurant and hospitality industry. And Felix also reaches millions of viewers each month with his presence on social media, with his content being shared on NBC, CBS, and the Daily Mail, earning him a reputation for saying what others won't a lot of the time. So, Felix, thanks for coming on today, and I'm definitely going to test you on that today.
Thanks for having me, man. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
I'd love to start with hearing kind of what's the current status of restaurant and hospitality industry down here in Miami?
I think that, we had a really big boom right before COVID with the Super Bowl and everything else being here, which is really what made the sales numbers pop. And I think during COVID, when everybody was closing, all the New Yorkers and people up east and people from LA and people from Europe saw this place, Miami, was still open. And, then you have a lot of the New Yorkers. Well, they've never tried my pizza. They've never tried my lasagna. So we've had a lot of saturation in 22, 23, 24, which now is kind of, we're starting to feel, there's definitely a lot of places closing. I think that a lot of people tried those guys' pizza and they weren't fans. So now there's a lot of places closing, but the funny part is that the demand still outweighs the inventory.
Does it really?
It's still crazy that if you have a second generation restaurant, it is the best piece of real estate you could possibly own right now.
That's kind of surprising because just my own experience around here, walking around here, talking with people. And so, I mean, I do see a demand definitely on the weekends. But the thing is on the weekdays, where I've been doing a lot of my research for this project too, I'm seeing places that are dead. And there was one place in particular, I forget the place up in Wynwood, what it was called, but I walk in, right when it opened. It was, I think, on a Monday or Tuesday. So, right when it opens for dinner, you're not going to have a big pop anyway. Sure. But place was dead. I'm starting to talk with the bartender, and he actually told me that the management has been kind of doing like an off-on close and reopen every couple of weeks too, just to kind of save on costs where like they know for a fact it's going to be dead. And then there might be a little pop for this weekend or so. Then they'll reopen, which was a really interesting business model, you know, because a restaurant, it's not like a computer where you're shutting it off on and off again. So that was interesting. And I was there basically for about the first hour and a half that they were open. Nobody there. They only had 20 covers for the night, which I get, granted 20 covers, Wynwood, dinner, oddball week, I get. But it was only the bartender, one server, one manager, two chefs, and I started to get this feeling like, damn, man, this might be a bloodbath of a summer.
I think it's be a bloodbath. I think that more and more, every year people are going to be playing with closing for the summer, because the peak season is now getting less and less, where before maybe it ended in June and started again in September. Now it's kind of ending right after F1 and not restarting till Art Basel. So people are definitely worried. Restaurant operators are definitely worried. And they're like, well, why don't we just close for the summer? And, I think that as long as they're not paying Brickell type rents, they can actually afford to do that.
Where do you think the best place is for a restaurant during the summer season?
In terms of
Like location, like neighborhood.
anything where locals thrive. I advise personally clients that, stick to the locals because the locals are here, 10 to 12 months a year.
Yeah.
Stay away from the tourist areas because, an area like Lincoln Road or Brickell, although they're showing density, I call it fake density, where maybe like Brickell has a lot of people, doesn't necessarily mean they're spending money. So I like neighborhoods. I like, neighborhoods like North Bay Village. I like Miami Shores. I like North Miami. I like South Miami. I like Coconut Grove. Any area aside from Coconut Grove that's not already priced out, because a lot of these neighborhoods are getting very expensive in terms of rent, and the operators, just they can't keep affording to pay those types of rents.
Have you seen the busy season, the typical busy season start to decline with the numbers that you're seeing? Because I feel like, and I've heard this too, even before I got in the industry, that, when COVID happened, it was busy. But ever since then, the busier season this has been the slowest, busiest season. Then the following year, this is the slowest, busiest season.
Right.
And now we're at a point where, I'm hearing servers and bartenders go, where was the busy season this year?
Right. So last year in January, the video that sent us viral was a restaurant video I did called Restaurant Armageddon, which, I thought that it was going to be a wrap for me for the year in terms of business. I did this video, telling the truth, letting people know how bad it's going to be. A lot of people were in denial, but when it happened, even with 2024 being Restaurant Armageddon season, we didn't have, things like the tariffs coming in. We didn't have unseen, circumstances that are going to affect the market now. So I don't really think that it's going to slow down. But at the same time, I think it's just going to be only the strong survive. I think that if you're already doing great numbers, you're going to continue doing great numbers. I mean, look, the list of the top 100 restaurants in the United States came out, 6 are from Miami. The number 1 and number 2, Joe Stone Crab is number 1, Milo is number 2. Over 50 million each. So can't be that bad. But I think that all the oversaturation that we got during COVID, that's where we're going to feel it right now.
Okay. That makes sense. I mean, because the more I'm talking with bartenders and servers, it's almost like they're on this 3 to 4 month little term with the restaurants just to see how it is, how it's going, how they're getting paid. And then the turnovers, I've seen it. I've spoke with over 150 bartenders and servers, and it kind of seems like they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Right.
I
think it's about how much guaranteed money they know they're going to walk away with. And obviously, the service charge issue and shifts and locations and, with noise, now there's things where they're trying to cut down hours, for noise in Wynwood. And
are they really?
Yeah. And
it's because of the residential units.
Correct.
It's because of the residential units.
Correct.
When I was used to be a property manager up in at Strata Wynwood, which is right next to Oasis, and that was the one of the first buildings to go in there, and it overlooked Oasis. Now, if you face north, people be like, "Oh my God, this is a great unit! It's perfectly priced."
Right.
And then they move in, and then within the first weekend, they're like, hey, what's this concert venue right in front of my window? And it's like, well, you're living in Wynwood,
right?
And you face a concert venue,
right?
I mean,
and then they make a call, and all of a sudden, what made Oasis cool, closes. They bring in another operator that doesn't even open. So that's what I see for Wynwood in terms of moving forward. All these developers are calling me like, hey, can you bring me a tenant for my rooftop? And I'm like, why? The neighbors are going to complain. You're going to lose it. They're like, really? I was like, wait, you guys are building these buildings. You're putting in these rooftops and you don't know that what's going on. So I think everybody's in for, some nice lessons,
How is Wynwood, by the way? Because Brickell, I know pretty well. And it's I'd say, it's settled with Miami
Sure.
residents. I feel like South Beach, everyone knows what South Beach is. Wynwood's interesting though, because Wynwood's like, I'd say like the entertainment spot
Right.
of Miami. It's branded that way, but when I go, it's kind of dead.
Yep.
Except for like the big events, but like you can't survive off the big events. I'm talking to this poor bartender who's pouring draft beers most of his shift, and I'm like, yeah, man, how's it going? Is it busy? Is it? Oh, well, in 2 weeks we got F1, and then he's naming these events that are like, there's maybe 4 weekends in the next 5 months that are going to be busy,
Right.
and I'm like, you're not going to make it, dude.
Right.
There's only so many hours of that, and so many drinks that you can take.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm like, does this guy even know what he's like, where he's coming from with
Right.
this? Like, how can you live off of these big weekends, And they're not guarantees regardless. I mean, if
Right.
it rains, you're done, right?
Yeah. Or if, you're paying $100 a foot, you're going to need more than those days just to make your rent.
Yeah. And I'm talking to him, I'm like, man, this poor kid, dude. I just and the more I walk through Wynwood surprised me the most out of everybody with the not being as busy as I had thought that they would be. Now, granted, when I was doing this work, it was mainly on the weekdays, but I made sure to ask people about the weekends, and they did say at the weekends they get a nice pop. But in my opinion, you can't. I don't know if you can survive just off of weekends that are probably half par in comparison to the big events that are a couple times a year.
No, I look at Wynwood very strategically. For me, the only side of Wynwood I would want to be on is the west side of Northwest 2nd. Why? Because those are the restaurants that show me that they make money. Now, you have a couple of randoms that are on the east side of Northwest 2nd, Bacan, Gramps, Dirty Rabbit, Miami, but that's it. All the action and all the money is on the west side of Northwest 2nd. You have, Pasties doing insane numbers. You have Q, you have Joe's Pizza, you have Sparrow, you have Zach the Baker, you have all these awesome concepts. And then the people that want to be next to those awesome concepts. The east side of Northwest 2nd, it's mostly, unfortunately, I got to say it, it's, Argentinians or out-of-towners that got suckered into building a brand new restaurant in the hardest permitting area, not in Florida, in the country.
Really?
All these grease trap situations, you could be waiting years to open, and now you're bleeding your investors dry, just paying rent and not being open every year. And developers and landlords know that, but guess what? They get a brand new second generation restaurant. They can flip it. They can get more rent for it. And, it's sad because it's become more of a business than a neighborhood.
What's the worst case scenario story you can share about that?
There was one in south of Fifth that we did a little report on. It was an Argentinian group that spent $1.7 million on a build out and they never opened.
Jesus,
There's
never opened.
restaurants that are still 3-4 years in, luckily that are well capitalized, that are still not open. And nobody can control it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's just one of those, you have to know how to navigate the city and deal with it. If not, you better have a good reserve.
Jesus, what's the I mean, I guess like it depends on the neighborhood, but like,
Sure.
Say I want to open a restaurant tomorrow between South Beach, Brickell, Edgewater, Midtown, Wynwood. What's the time frame I'm looking at?
From like a brand new build out,
Yeah,
years. You could, depending on who your expediter is and your general contractor and how fast they could turn and burn a restaurant space. If you don't have a grease trap in your space and you're starting from scratch and you haven't paid your impact fees, which most people don't even know that you have to pay impact fees for restaurants and how expensive they are.
what's an impact fee?
Pretty much to convert your space, your retail space, into a restaurant, you got to pay for that. You want outdoor seating, you got to pay for that too. You got to pay per seat. or you got to pay
really?
per capacity.
Jesus.
You know, a lot of people opening these places, they don't know that. And then what they thought they were going to have set aside for pretty furniture and beautiful decor, they're just literally trying to cut corners just to open the doors.
Wow. And is that South Florida specific, Miami specific? Do other cities have impact fees or?
The impact fees, yes. Miami is very specific with the grease trap and with the DERM and Department of Environmental. It's the county. Okay. So the only thing worse than opening a restaurant in Miami is opening a restaurant in Miami Beach from scratch.
Oh, geez, really? That bad?
Yeah. So now you're dealing with both. You're dealing with Miami and Durham and Miami Beach, and it's tough. It's really, really tough.
And what do you mean by grease trap? Like an actual
grease trap? In 2019, they passed this law called FOG 2.0, which pretty much meant that you have to start from scratch with the permitting. And you have only a couple people sitting in this office. You have thousands of applications coming in where you need an engineer to do a plan. The city needs to come. They need to improve it. You need to do your work. That they need to come back. If something's wrong, you're going to have to redo it. And then you go back to the line on permits.
Well, that's a nightmare.
It is it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. That's why my company, I always preach, buy the corporation. It's better to spend a couple bucks buying the restaurant than building it from scratch. You're going to save yourself years on even something stupid as a sign can take up to like 6 months now.
Jesus.
If without an existing business, it's a nightmare.
People still want to.
And the demand still outweighs the inventory. But what I mean by that now is people are at least getting more educated. We're trying to educate them.
Yeah.
So for them, they call me on a daily basis like, we only want to buy a second generation. We only want second gen. We're not looking to buy from scratch. Now you have big groups that are like, hey, what we see isn't what we like. We have to build from scratch.
Yeah.
They're going to be in it, but they have the money to do so.
Wow, it's kind of surprising.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was advised buy the building. If you're going to do the work, buy the building. You know that nobody's going to kick you out in a couple of years, and no matter what, you'll probably make more on the real estate than you will out of the restaurant.
Makes sense because there's a sign at the bottom of the building that my studio's in for a steakhouse called Dust.
Oh, you mean the one that was supposed to open 3 years ago?
Yeah. And it still says on the windows, Dust, coming 2022. And I walk past that and I just shake my head because there's so much to unpack on that. You're talking it's mid 2025.
Right.
And I'm like, let alone it hasn't obviously opened. Nobody's changed the signs.
Right.
Regardless. And then it's like somebody's getting so boned out of that. Either the people supposed to collect the rent or the restaurant who's paying the rent and isn't opened.
I think that retail space has actually changed hands, I think 3 times in the last 5 or 6 years.
Really? People just trying to hold on to it or flip it? Or
no, somebody wants to buy. Listen, it's a great, from an outsider point, it was technically a second gen. It's a great location. You're right across from Bayfront and, the arena and all that stuff. And
you got Waldorf going into.
Waldorf going in. You have tall ceilings. It's beautiful space. But then you have to take into account that it's a condo and you got to deal with the condo board and, the association. Yeah. And if someone hasn't been able to open it, if 2 people haven't been able to open it, it might be something more to it. Just my opinion.
Probably.
Right.
I want to get your thoughts on the on restaurants that are succeeding or they're falling flat, because I feel like this summer is going to be probably. I just feel like from the people that I've talked to and the servers and the bartenders who are on the ground lines who are serving these tables and walking out with 15 covers a night for dinner. Kind of tough for the server to survive, and if they're not surviving, they're not bringing any money in for the restaurants. It's kind of sounding like obviously location is the biggest factor here. But what's if you could summarize it as short as possible,
right,
between the restaurants that are thriving and then the ones that are probably shutting their doors this year.
Right. And I don't necessarily believe that the location has everything to do with it. I think that the guys who survive year after year, it's the same guys. It's the guys that know what they're doing. The guys that know their numbers, the guys that know what days to close in the summer, how to cut staff, how to cut down on food, what to market, how far to deliver your food. Those guys have it down to a science. Now, are they going to take a hit? Sure, everybody's going to take a hit. But are they going to be okay? Yeah, because they budgeted for the slow months and know exactly what they're doing, as opposed to maybe the guy that opened in November, had a great peak season, thinks this is the way it's going to be for the rest of the year, only to quickly realize, where is everybody? What's going on? Why are my sales so bad? And, we see that from a lot of restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, because Joe's Stone Crab, the number one
in the country,
right. In sales, they close for how many months throughout the year? It's May. I think they close at the end of May. Or?
Right. I think now they stay open. They changed that.
Oh, did they?
And now they stay open. But I don't know if you saw, they made an announcement, which I thought was really cool. They're actually lowering prices. While everybody's raising prices, I think on a couple of items, they're actually going to lower the number as like a gesture of Joe's kind of seeing, where we are in the world. And, and I thought that was just, I was floored by it. When they can raise the prices as business people, if they wanted to right now, because there's such demand, the fact that they're going to lower prices, that's why they make it. That's why they're number one, whether reported or not, every year, day in, day out. That's why the wait staff start in their 20s and retire there. That's why the same families that, went there with their parents are still going there with their kids. They just figured it out. And they own the real estate. They've owned it for, 100 years already, They got it.
They were there before. I think Miami Beach was an actual town.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Crazy.
But I mean, it's things like that because, I've heard stories of like the servers. Some of the servers get so close with the guests that they go on vacation with them.
Yeah.
I've heard the servers actually, and this is wild, that the servers, when they used to close, then if they don't close anymore, when they used to close, they made so much during the busy season that they could live off of collecting unemployment based off of their income during the busy season. And these servers are buying homes and investing with money that they made. And that was very surprising that they were only working like 6, 7, 8 months or something like that too.
Well, and I heard the same thing, so when I was at Carbone recently, I asked one of the servers, because unfortunately I have to start asking everybody now, hey, does the service charge include gratuity? And he's like, yes, sir, 100%, gratuity goes to the staff. We do not expect anything extra. And I was like, wow. I was like, and these are the guys that retire in those places. So, they're definitely doing something right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when a place is, I'd say, moral and ethic too, they're playing the long game on that. Because I was over in Lucky Cat, over in South of Fifth, and Gordon Ramsay's, and they're that place got to be closing up shop soon. I mean, they've got to, just from what I know, because you're talking a place that was paying rent since 2019. They closed there in 2020 because of COVID. And then they reopen and been open since. But I'm talking with this bartender, and I'm like, when's your busy night, man? And he goes, Saturday, okay. I'm like, how many covers you guys bringing in on that busy Saturday? Take a guess.
I mean, if they're not doing at least 75 to 100 a minimum, and if he's saying one night a week or 2 nights a week, they're doing good. Yeah, the DOA.
80 on and that's your busiest
there you
night.
Go,
Yeah. He's on point. Restaurant guru right here, man.
There you go.
Doing 80. And and for people who don't know what a cover is, that's just one person walking into the restaurant with a reservation. That's how you know it's a cover. And you've got 80 is your busy night. Now, granted, if you're a restaurant and you're busy, I would say, granted, on the low end, I would say between like 125 to 150 up to 200, and that also not counting people just walking off the street. That's all reservation based, and even that's not your crazy numbers, because you're talking holidays, peak time. You're talking like you want at least 300 to sometimes a 900 covers is a full house in a lot of these restaurants, and for a restaurant that's south of 5th, like Lucky Cat. I was just talking with somebody this the other day. I'm like, all right, if I'm a tourist, I'm going in. I'm going to stay in south of 5th, enjoy some nice dining, a little quieter part of South Beach. Joe's, you got Joe's, you got Carbone, you got a couple steakhouses.
You have Paul
Fogo de
McGabby,
Chao,
you have Fogo de Chao, you have Poppy Steak, you have Milos, you have restaurants. You have at least 8 restaurants doing over 8-9 million.
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm like, Lucky Cat, I'm like, probably not on my top 5. So even though the location is like high-end location, granted, you're in the highest competitive restaurant game in the country. You got Joe's staring at you there, which like it's a really tough market down there if you're just trying to play, and you're also playing the I think a game that is outplayed at this point, which is high-end sushi. I think that is so played out at this point across the board throughout Miami, and I don't think that was the best spot there.
I think that south of 5th in general is just, it's like everybody else. It's going to get over cannibalized. We saw it 2 years ago when the amount of restaurants, originally you had 8 restaurants doing over 10 million with Prime 112, and you had Joe's, and you just had quality places. Poppy Steak out of that small space is pumping numbers. But the more restaurants go in, you're going to affect sales from other people. And if you're not already a known name or nobody cares, look at Catch. Catch came in, they took a huge space. You have Gaia coming in. But that means that people are going to suffer. Other restaurants are going to suffer and they're going to close. I think that we had 3 this week that were announced, or maybe not announced yet. But I know for a fact 3 or 4 restaurants are going to be closed before the summer in south of 5th. And these are guys that spent millions of dollars. But you're not slowing down. Again, you have Gaia coming. I think St. Ambrose is coming. You still have more people, like more operators coming in for the long term. Nikki Beach is going to be out soon.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah. I think Major Food did a deal with the city. I think they're taking that space. And so the landscape is going to change, but it's not.
Yeah, I am kind of surprised though that the demand to open restaurants. So I'm pretty surprised at that, just because, and thinking of the economy right now too, which I think is also a indicator. I guess where like people visit Miami, I guess they're probably open to pulling out that credit card.
You've never tried my pizza.
Yeah. I mean, we do it better. That's the approach. That's what I think Hampton Social took in Mary Brickell Village. That we're a name. We've done great at other places. Let's open up in maybe the worst location in the best location.
Let's take the most expensive location.
Yeah. And just throw our name on there, and people are going to flock in here, and they had and that hit them right in the face, I think.
And you know what? It's Hampton Social is a pretty good brand. I've been to their Orlando location several times. Place is packed. Place is mobbed. You know what? Maybe Brickell wasn't the move for them. Maybe it should have been another area. I actually think that if they went into a different area, they would have had a much better chance of success.
Yeah.
Look at Bottled Blonde.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect example. In Scottsdale, Arizona, they do, I'm not going to put the number out there. I do know the number, but, a big number, millions and millions and millions of dollars. They didn't make it 11 months in Wynwood. So what does that tell you?
Well, it's also Miami surprise too, because I used to work at a sports bar too, and I kind of it was a little sad thinking of Miami in this way too, but it's the hard truth that Miami is not. Your sports teams have to compete against going on a yacht, during the weekend, jet skiing, going to all these fancy restaurants, a place like Nikki Beach. You're competing with everything else that is considered equal.
Right.
This isn't Boston where the whole city shuts down for like a Celtics preseason game.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? Then people are killing each other over the NBA finals, you know? I mean, granted, everyone knows the famous story of people running out in the Heat finals when, the game wasn't over yet. You know, that because when I used to work at a sports bar, I was like, sports bars, man, are tough business here because people generally are not coming into a sports bar to watch like the Florida Panthers. Even though I was working at the sports bar when they were in the Stanley Cup finals.
Right.
Dead. Nobody came for it. The only people came were just coming in just to sit down. Nobody came because they're in the finals. I mean, the Miami Heat, a little bit different, but it was also, you could tell people going there because they thought other people were going there for the game. They weren't there to go and root for the Heat.
Right.
They were going there just because it was trendy and something to do.
Right.
When, it also was a little sad when I moved here and I saw that because I was like, there's not that true Miami blood in some of these sports teams. The Dolphins, yeah, I mean, football is football. But it was a culture shock to me.
But that's also why an
Bottle
operation
Blonde went down, I think, too.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you have an operation like Flanagan's that figured it out, and they're opening more locations, and they have a diehard following. And you know what? Every time I'll mention, a restaurant going out of business on our social media, and everybody's like, "It's okay, turn it into a Flanagan's." People love it because they figured out how to keep their costs low, how to make their customers happy, and just how to have that, neighborhood feel to it. And I think that people should really, instead of trying to, reinvent the wheel or bring something from
so
wherever,
luxurious and it's played out.
Because the bottom line is the locals don't care. I'm not going to mention restaurants who it was, but there, let's say there was a restaurant that came to Miami recently and didn't perform like they thought they would. And I asked somebody, I'm like, what's your opinion? And this was somebody that knew. Like, what's your opinion? Why do you think that it's not doing well? They're like, yeah, because I can go there when I'm in Vegas. I can go there when I'm in New York. When I'm here, I don't want that, And I think that that's the misconception a lot of restaurants from out of town bring, that, again, you've never tried my pizza. But in Miami, I think they're more about cheering on the local guys. At least that's what it's become. As opposed to, the big corporate machines that they just don't care about. A lot of love has been given to like the young chefs who are really trying to do different things, and will go into neighborhoods that some of these companies normally wouldn't go into, whether it's Alapata or Little River, and they're doing really special types of restaurants, and that's what the locals want to go to. They don't give a shit about it, Joe Schmo that opened in a 10,000 square foot place in Miami Beach.
Yeah, well, that's the saying of the regulars pay the bills.
That's right.
Keep the electric on there. Flanagan's is interesting with that because I feel like they're a place where, people who are getting out of work or something like that too, they don't want to stop on their way home and spend half of what they made that day at work on like a Tito's cranberry.
Right.
For
$45.
Yeah, for like $45,
right.
And then you got somebody who's behind the bar, and it's a corporate setting, so the person's measuring an ounce and a half to the T, and then pouring it, and then that's it.
Right.
And then filling it with ice, and then it's like, dude, I'm paying like plus a service charge like $30 for this Tito's cranberry, and then it's just like, I'm good, dude. I'm never coming back here again, man.
And then what do they say from there? I'm going to Flanagan's, or I'm going to wherever.
Yeah.
One of my local guys closer to the house, and
something more casual too. I think the luxuriness of things, I mean, it's still there. I think Miami as a whole is branded for it there, especially in the major tourist sites, but especially the summertime. I mean, I think you got to have something there for the summertime, especially for Miami residents who, a lot of people, when they visit Miami, they're visiting their friends and people who live here. And then that's the person who's then going to take them to these places. And if you don't have a tie with that person who lives here, you're losing out on that bachelorette party who's coming down to visit their friend or whatnot. So
everybody wants to go to those bougie places. And, I don't mind doing bougie once in a while, because it feels good. And when guests come, it's nice, somewhere nice to take them, But even the bougie operators, the guys that know what they're doing, the guys that have been in the game for a long time, they know when to sign a lease. They know when to sell a place. They know when to relocate. They know when to rebrand. They just know what to do. Other operators come into the market and, they buckle under pressure, or, all of a sudden they thought they knew what they're doing with their 10,000 marketing people and influencers, and all of it turned out to be nothing. And the place was out of business 9 months later.
Yeah, the influencer game. I know of some restaurants that are doing that, and it's cringy.
Right.
Almost, it's cringy to say the least. When you're hiring people to come to your restaurant, for them to put on a show, and people go, "Oh, who are they? They're dining. It's a table of 10. Look at them. They're fancy."
Right.
I don't think it leads to sales. I mean, maybe there's brand awareness per se, but a place like Gecko that has Bad Bunny part of the ownership,
right?
That's different. I think that hones in on the celebrityness of it. But the places that are trying to paint this show that celebrities are coming through, I think is really played out.
Yeah, I think the only one that could really, there's probably 3 people in the city that could pull that off, Dave Grutman being one of them. By far one of the hardest working people in the industry. And it's very hard to outwork a guy like Dave Grutman because the guy is a machine, And then you partner up with Bad Bunny, and it's pretty hard to fail on something like that, I think, somebody like Roman Jones is another guy, Kiki on the River, and he's got concepts that also, he's a workaholic, and if he's doing the models and bottles, he's doing it the right way. And the guys from Mila, they're not the number 2, highest grossing restaurant in the country because they don't know what they're doing. Now they're buying their own real estate in Coconut Grove and on the river. And, I think they also just figured out where the money should go in terms of whether it's influencers or whatever they're spending their money on, they're buying the property. But in terms of influencers, listen, there's a couple influencers I definitely have a lot of respect for that I've seen change the business in terms of, now it doesn't have to be a big place, but like mom and pops, you have somebody like Mr. Eats 305, George, who I have a lot of respect for, and he does a great job. He can literally change your business overnight by posting about you.
Like a guy like Portnoy with pizza.
Portnoy's, come on.
Yeah.
Find me somebody who can change a business more than Portnoy. I've literally seen him change mom and pops overnight, So when you have something like that behind you, it's definitely a big push.
But those guys are also authentic too. That's the difference. I doubt you could pay Portnoy to come and eat a half good pizza and rate it a 10 out of 10. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
you can't buy him. You can't buy him.
You can't. And I think a lot of these, I heard of a place down in Brickell that are hiring the entertainment company literally to put on this stock show. Right. And that's the type of shit that I'm it's beyond cringe.
Right. But that could work for the first few months. But then after those first few months when, you see the same 3 modeling companies on a Saturday night, after that, you're going to either have to keep paying for it or you got to actually get real people through the door.
Yeah. And what was interesting to me when I started working in the industry and seeing how much money was coming into and not being from Miami originally was the introduction to this service charge, which is always new to somebody who is new here because Miami seems to be the only citywide who does this, where they throw in that 20% service charge on the check, and it's going on the check as soon as you walk in, and you're probably not noticing it till you leave. There are sporadic restaurants throughout the country that are starting to do it, so it'll be interesting to see how that is because where I'm from in Jersey, you sit down every once in a while, you'll be at a place who does it. Miami citywide it is. I want to know your thoughts on kind of how did that exactly start?
In Miami?
In Miami.
From the legends and the stories that I've heard, and again, I've
Like
been
the
coming to
Europeans?
Miami. It definitely started with the Europeans, and it definitely started in South Beach. As many people know, you're, not trying to be racist or, politically incorrect, but Europeans don't tip. That's just the
It's in
nature of
the
the beast.
culture. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
in the culture. You go to, I just got back from Paris a few weeks ago, and there was no place that's charged an automatic gratuity, and nor do they charge an extra tip. Their servers there are on a per hour basis, and it's enough for them to actually live. Now, whether it's a society thing where it's just cheaper cost to live or whatever the case may be, they are not used to tipping. They are not used to service charge. They are not used to auto gratuity. So I think that after a while in Miami, on especially Lincoln Road, Ocean Drive, which many of you know, because if you guys were hit with a service charge in the early 2000s, late 90s for the first time, it's a good chance that it was probably on Lincoln Road or Ocean Drive. So I think that it started there. And as the costs started, going up higher for labor, for staff, for taxes, for everything, other restaurants, in other neighborhoods started it. And it just got maybe a little bit out of control. And, we reported on it many times and kind of thought, at first it was very, very sneaky in the way it was done. And people don't know, is it a tip? Is it a service charge? And, over the last month, we see things maybe a little different than we saw them before. Not different, not like one person's right or one person's wrong, but there definitely needs to be something done in terms of setting some sort of boundaries of what should be, where service charges should be, where they shouldn't. For example, a lot of shit that people have been giving me and saying is, well, you can't charge, on a takeout order 20%. And I absolutely agree on that. You absolutely should not, But then when do you cross that line? Okay, you don't do that. But the minute you take out the service charge, your labor and your menu has to go up by a minimum of 15%, or you will not make it, or you will have no staff.
Well, I agree with the takeout. The takeout's awful because a lot of times too, and the difference with takeout in comparison to dining in is that when you're dining in, although it will be small, it will be on the menu.
Right.
Takeout, you're online just scrolling through. So there's really no place where you're going to end up seeing it. I mean, and I've done takeout a lot of times. I don't even think on the actual bill when you're paying that it's up there too. So, or at least it's legible or anything before you actually end up ordering. So I definitely agree with takeout on there. I think that that's something that it's just a bad business practice, especially because a lot of times there's also things being delivered. And then there's delivery fees on top of that. And a takeout in and of itself is somebody actually going to the restaurant to pick it up themselves. So the only service, because you think of service charge, you think of service, is the cook who's cooking it. And then either the cook is or the runner is packaging the food. And then it sits at the host stand or whatever.
Right.
So literally zero service. And then usually when you have to go pick it up, you have to find somebody. Nobody wants to help you because no one's making money off of you standing there helping. So it is tough. The service charge in general, I've seen, obviously, guests are confused as hell on it. They're assuming that it's a tip. But the more I talk to bartenders and servers throughout the city, they're just as confused, if not more confused than the guests when it comes to where that service charge actually ends up going.
Right.
Because the guests, I've done, I think I did close to 50 street interviews, 50, 60 street interviews throughout Miami, just asking people, hey, random person on the street, what do you think of the service charge? And usually they're like, oh, well, blah, 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 but they still paid it and didn't say, please take it off.
Right.
So they'll complain about it, but they'll still pay, which means
Right.
you're at market rate of how much you can charge on top for like tips or service.
Well, also, I think if you're in Miami and you're paying $200 per person, you can afford to pay the service charge.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that's-
They also, most of the time, assume that it's a tip. Now, there were some people that were surprised that said, literally, yeah, I assumed there was a proprietor's fee.
Right.
So I was kind of surprised that there are some people that either you had no idea or you knew exactly where it was going. It wasn't really too much in between there. But on the other side, the servers and the bartenders that I spoke with pretty much assumed that it was the tip. And they typically start working there based off of, okay, it's a tip. But the huge difference between service charge and gratuity there being, if it says gratuity, that goes directly to your server or bartender, outside of any tip outs that they got to give to like a runner or
Bar back.
Yeah. But the service charge, basically, if there's a service charge, if it says service charge, that is communicating to the guest that a portion, it could be any portion of that, goes to the restaurant, and then the restaurant basically decides, okay, costs, labor, what do we want to do with this?
Right.
And I found that actually servers and bartenders were less educated on the service charge than the average guest.
Right.
That was wild to me.
I probably asked around 50 restaurants, and it was weird just how across the board the answers were. You know, some actually I was very satisfied with the answers where they would say, okay, 20% service charge, 10% goes to the server, 5% goes to the bar back and food runner and etc. And 5% maybe will go to an undocumented worker, or, you know, because you know what, undocumented workers in Miami keeps the scene going. So I'm like, okay, I'll buy that. But I think that everybody can agree that when you're the client and you get that bill with a 20% service charge, the worst thing and the most embarrassing thing is like, shit, now I got to ask this person, is this a tip?
Yeah.
And then if it's not a tip, you're paying 40%.
Yeah.
And then you get mad because number one, you're embarrassed that you had to be put in that situation, and you got to cough up another 20%.
Yeah, and my biggest kickback on this, one of the biggest, I have many.
Sure.
But is the server and the bartender, especially in these tourist areas where they give the check. And I used to work at this place where I was the only person to go, hey guys, just want to let you know there's a 20% service charge factored in. It goes, it's spread throughout the restaurant. And I didn't want to give so much of a spiel,
right,
but I didn't want to just leave it general to where they're left questioning. And 99% of the time, they took that then as the tip, and I got zeroed out. Meanwhile, most of the time, the other servers and bartenders are just giving them the check, and they just got off the plane going on a cruise later on today, so now they're double tipping.
Right.
And now they're like, yes, yes, yes. But, living with a good conscience is also, it also means something, and is also very, very valuable. So I always thought that was always the better approach, but at the same time, then you're just getting shafted, because then, the service charge, a good portion of that ends up going to, the restaurant instead of you, when the guest assumes that it's going to you. And I'm not going to sit there and throw my restaurant under the bus and say, 2% goes to
the Coke and Stripper Fund.
Yeah. Because I started to feel like it started to go as work and operate as like a strip club, where the strippers got to tip out the house for hosting them in this, doing these illegal capacities, which that makes sense. I'm saying, like, they're going to get in big trouble if you don't tip them out. And so for hosting this. So I get that. So I started to view it kind of in that same light. It's like, this guest thinks they're tipping me, and I'm not really seeing that amount of money. And I started to realize how bad it became when everybody across this city with a service charge gets paid at the end of 2 weeks.
Yep.
And it's all a pool system. And the pool system, some of these pool systems are wild. There's a place in Wynwood that operates on a pool system not by the day. You know, like it closes
Sure.
out at the end of the day, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, it basically
Right.
is all the days.
Yep.
So it's a pool system based off of the week.
Right.
So there's no incentive in working a very busy Saturday night
Right.
if the person who opens a Monday shift and it's slow is going to get the same amount of the pool that somebody worked on the Saturday night.
Correct.
And I'm seeing that now. That's obviously one little small case there, but I'm seeing this across the board. And I've interviewed over 150 bartenders and servers, and the education on this is dumbfounding. But I can attest, because I was one of these myself, where I get hired, and they say your tip's included.
Right.
They use the word tip is included, and you're like, okay, because I used to dine at places before I apply.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, 20% is included, man. I mean, granted, say, even 5% goes back to the bartenders
Right.
and the tip outs. I'm keeping 15%
Right.
myself, and I keep any additional tip.
Right.
Like, I'm doing pretty good, because at my average, I'm probably taking home about 18 to 19%, because I would get a lot of over tips from
Right.
people. There was a good 3-week span. I averaged at this one location a 35% tip rate,
Wow.
because it was 20% gratuity included, and I was getting over tips like
Right.
crazy. I mean, because you're talking the perfect storm.
Right.
Good service with very good clientele who's in here from Miami, willing to spend money at these events, and I'm giving them over the top service.
Right.
So,
And they're taking you on a cruise.
yeah, basically, you know. But seeing across the board, I mean, a lot of the restaurants hiring people based off of this, and then it's not until I'd say a month and a half in, these servers and bartenders are going, wait, what was your check? What was your check? I worked, 55 hours each week, and my check's not even $2,000, which basically comes out to like, around 18 to 20 bucks an hour, which when you're working a lot of these very, very busy shifts, you're starting to feel a little bit slighted. So then you're like, where's that money going? And I think that's kind of where everybody is right now, wanting to know where that money's going. And I want to share some numbers with you and get some of your thoughts.
Love it.
Have you seen any of my recent like Instagram reels so back, I used to work at the sports bar, and I'm talking with this server, and I'm like, they tell us 2% comes
Right.
out. I'm like, okay, 2%. Okay, I get it.
Right.
Hey, I'll give you 2% to have a tip included.
Right.
So then I keep the rest of the 18%, right? That's pretty fair.
Right.
Then I'm like, but I honestly, I mean, my one night here, my own checkout was $800.
Right.
So then I'm like, it's not 2%. So then I'm like, okay, well, let's keep going. We're not going to notice 2%. 2%
Right.
at a 2,000 with like $40, you're not going
Right.
to notice. Let's climb it up, because we're noticing it's probably $400 or $500
Right.
after 2 weeks. And we kind of were like, it's got to be north of 7%. I doubt it's more than 12.
Right.
So then I'm like, it's between there. And it probably depends on the week. It depends on the business, and it depends on your relationship with that
Right.
business. And then from doing my research, I've got restaurant after restaurant after restaurant with people saying and confirming that their restaurant saying we're taking 8% out. We're taking 9% out. And I'm seeing that across the board. Now, granted, the majority of a lot of these restaurants and servers are going, well, they say it's about 3%. They're
Right.
saying 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%, 3%. But then they keep going on, and they're like, but honestly, I'm not really even sure, because it's got to be a lot more. They're taking our tips, and now I'm actually getting a lot of DMs from
Right.
some servers off of my reels saying, you should go to this place because they're taking 80% of the service charge. And
Right.
then I'm like, it's
Because they don't get to see it.
they don't get to see it.
So when you don't get to see something, you always assume the worst. So I think that's also one of the biggest issues is the transparency. You know what? Maybe they are paying, most of the guys are paying legit, and, I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But because none of the restaurants show it, because listen, their accounting department, in their mind, we don't want people knowing what the overall numbers are. It makes everybody paranoid, and it makes everybody start to wonder, I should have, I had more tables. I should have made more. Yeah, maybe. But I think the miscommunication in this whole service charge drama is probably the main, ingredient to like a perfect storm.
Yeah. I think so too. Cause, I was just at a restaurant the other day, talking with somebody, and it's like hitting my face against a wall too, because I can almost. And it's funny because a lot of these servers and bartenders, I started beating them to the punch. I was like, "You get paid every 2 weeks as a pool system." Yeah.
How'd you
And I'm
know?
like, yeah, exactly.
How did you know?
And I mean, these numbers here are pretty standard. I would say it's not standard, but I would say it meets expectations. So, I went to over 150 restaurants to interview servers and bartenders. Now, this is based off of exactly 150 restaurants, because some of I marked a few off just because it was like, I have no idea what your setup is here. For the person I'm talking to, I can't get like a good depiction to put into this. So I was like, I only want to use stuff that I can really kind of confirm, and I got South Beach, Brickell, Wynwood, downtown. And then I clumped these 3 neighborhoods together, Midtown, Edgewater, and the Design District, just because like they're all in the same kind of nook. And Edgewater doesn't have a lot of restaurants. Right. Midtown, you have a small nook, but like it doesn't have like Brickell and South Beach. The Design District does, but you're starting to get a little bit of north of that immediate, So I got the average service charge in South Beach, 19.67. Brickell kind of goes down a tiny notch at 19.48.
Really surprising.
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
I thought it would be more.
Yeah. And Wynwood, you got 19%. Downtown climbs up 19.3%.
Wow, that's surprising.
It surprised me until I went there. And a lot of the bigger brands are doing it.
Right.
A lot of them are doing it, which is surprising.
Are we talking like Bayside, or are we talking?
Oh no, we're talking Miami World Center.
Got it. Brick and mortar, the newer big restaurants.
Yep.
Got it.
And
they got to make some of that money back from construction.
They it was surprising. Because some of the ones, I think Maple and Ash is doing it, and they're in the top 100 independent restaurants
in Chicago.
too.
Their Chicago location. Yeah.
So Midtown, Edgewater, and Design District, 19.08, and they were the lowest. And they actually, I was kind of very impressed with them, because you're talking Edgewater, or I would say Midtown especially, some high cost areas to operate in there. Especially the rents are insane.
No, you know what? Midtown, this is a misconception. This is the one thing I do know, that Midtown is actually, their rents are still kind of undervalued.
Oh, I'm talking residential rents. My bad. Yeah. I'm talking resident, because I used to work in the property management field, and those residential rents were, you're talking 2-3 years ago, studios in like the 3,000 range. Right.
It's a great neighborhood.
Yeah. I mean,
Tinder
you got Central
Central.
Park. Yeah. I mean,
You got Tinder Central.
Yeah,
It's great,
that's what I hear. That's what I hear. I know.
Tinder and a dog, you're good. That's it.
So, Miami wide though, you're talking average on that is 19.31. So if you sit at a place and there's a service charge, the average is 19.31. And the percentage of restaurants in these areas that have a service charge. So this is your chance of, if you go to one of these neighborhoods, this is the chance that any of these restaurants are going to have a service charge. South Beach, 94%. Brickell, 82%. And Brickell, I was surprised.
Yep.
I was surprised because...
in a good way or in a bad way?
I would say more in a good way in this, because Brickell, I was assuming every single place has it.
Right. Because the rents are just insane.
Yeah, I really assumed, and I was surprised that like some of the ones, I mean, North Italia doesn't have it in Mary Brickell Village, but there was others.
But is it because maybe it's a Cheesecake Factory thing, or?
It could be, but like scratch them. Like there was, I don't know if it was Blondes. I'd have to look, but there was another one there that's in a little nook that doesn't have it when everybody else does.
Right.
And then I found that there was usually 1 or 2 outliers that just don't have it. And I was like, okay, you do have people that are operating in the same location, just as competitive, and then they don't have the service charge.
Right.
So it is interesting how a lot of these restaurants, because the rents and the costs, I understand, but then there's others that are succeeding without even having it. So then I'm like,
Right. Do you feel that the service charge versus the non-service charge, do you find difference in the service based on what you've seen?
I wouldn't say a clear-cut service. Also because, you're talking at the end of this, I got the percentage of restaurants that have a service charge is 75.2% out of everybody.
Right.
Across the board here. So it was hard to kind of realize who has. I could say it's tough even with because the people that I spoke with the service charge. As soon as I got into that conversation, downer. They got instantly downer because in the back of their mind they know that this isn't my tip. It's not going to me, and it also is a reminder that they don't know how they're paid.
Right.
I remember right down here, I think it was Novikov, the bartender was like, people think that this goes to me. It doesn't go to me. So I would say on a deeper level, probably people more irritated. But
Novikov, like, for example, like I like Novikov. And if you wouldn't have told me that, the service there is great. So I never would have guessed because that like people would think that because, you wouldn't tell by the service there. Like I like the service there.
Well, that's the thing.
Right.
You can't. I think in South Beach, you can.
Right. Oh, easily. Yeah.
Service
100%.
is bad. And I found out that there are some reasons for that. A, the people who work in South Beach live in an entirely different area. So it's not a walk to work.
No, it's a commute.
And then I'm going to see some people. They also are very new to Miami.
Right.
So the culture, it's a different culture that they're used to. A lot of them, there's a reason why it's slowed down over there too, because the servers, I'm out here trying to help servers. And this one woman at this one restaurant, I was 25 minutes after I asked for my check to get my check.
Right.
And then I just went up to the host stand because I was like, I can't do this time, man.
And you're not going to not tip because the tip's already included?
Yeah. And then that's the thing. You got the service charge and then it's like, but then again, too, I'm putting myself in her shoes and she got like quadruple sat at the same time. And the tables are on top of each other, tighter than Cheesecake Factory,
right.
which is surprising. I never thought you could be tighter than Cheesecake Factory.
Right.
This one restaurant was where I'm basically like, I don't want to say I'm dragging the wagon, but my ass is on people's tables as I'm walking through. You know what I'm saying? And,
absolutely.
So also there, but when you're over there, that you are a little slowed down mentality. But I would say generally the service is I was surprised in this project. The service was generally pretty good.
Right.
Granted, the first thing out of my mouth when I sat down was, "Hey, I'm a bartender too," So there's that.
Game recognized game?
Yeah. But very talkative people. I was surprised because I used to live in South Beach when I first moved down here, and say awful would be an understatement. So I kind of this is Miami, right. And I blanketed Miami on it when there are a lot of places, but I can, the luxury spots that have the 20% service charge in that are very expensive. I think you have the managers walking around and you have people ensuring like they're having a good time and they have they're not allowed to have a bad time. I think that's the mentality at a lot of these places, which is kind of their saving grace because you can't charge a 20% service charge on a $300 check and the service is awful. You just can't.
Based on what you've seen in terms of neighborhoods, and what neighborhood do you see falling off the fastest in terms of, like, if this is going to be the summer where a lot of restaurants close?
Absolutely Wynwood. Absolutely Wynwood. I'm talking ghost towns where when I'm walking around these places, it's clear to me nobody around here has a job that is local. Right. You have a lot of people who either work online or are using this as like a crash pad on business trips and stuff.
Right.
Because there's no walking traffic. Brickell, all right, Monday, that's not your busy night, but there's traffic, there's cars, there's up and down. I was alone in Wynwood.
But Brickell, again, it's tricky because I've spoken to, servers and bartenders that work in Brickell. They bring their own coffee. They bring their own lunches. Again, the density looks good, but nobody's spending money. Now, I'm not saying nobody in general, but a lot of those, when you're opening up a space, when you think, oh my gosh, look at all of this foot traffic, we're going to make so much money. You better take into account that a lot of those people who commute from Hialeah and Doral are bringing their lunches and their own coffee, right? Yeah. They're not going to spend $10 on a latte, in Mary Brickell Village.
No. That was one thing I saw throughout because I used to be even a cook at Chili's and stuff, and I would see these servers too. When we're slow, that's when everyone's hungry, right. And that's when everyone's buying food, getting takeout. I'm like, you're in the red now,
right?
But I would say I generally got a feel that servers and bartenders, they don't know what's going on. Exactly. They know something's up because they know that they're getting underpaid from what they're expecting to get paid.
Right.
I would say I was surprised at a couple of setups in particular. There's, family meal.
Sure.
I've gotten that at restaurants I've worked at. It's complimentary because you're using like the scraps from the restaurant throughout the week to put a meal together for the staff to feed them, which is also beneficial for both sides because the servers eat for free, but the restaurant is able to kind of use that waste for something. Right. And most importantly too, you eat right before your shift, so there's no incentive to try to haggle somebody for some free food.
Right.
So there's a lot of benefits into that. And obviously good gesture, that's good stuff,
100%.
Especially back of the house guys.
Right.
Surprised. So a lot of places charging their staff for family meal.
Right.
Which is not a ton of money, but if you eat it or not, you get charged if you sign up for it. You know, so if you go on vacation for 2 weeks in that month, you're paying for it regardless. Right. And it's such a small cost in my view that it's not something that I think is ideal. I saw a place. This isn't surprising, honestly, at this place at Nurserat with Salt-Based Restaurant.
We're doing over-under when that place becomes available.
Yeah, are you? Yeah.
We've been doing it over-under for a while.
Have you?
But you know what? In terms of the service charge, they have a very interesting case study. As obviously they were going to be the first ones to be, dragged into a class action lawsuit over the service charge, and somehow they wound up winning because they could show that they did all of their paperwork, the I-7, all the right way. And surprisingly, they won that one. Even though everybody thought that, they weren't doing the right thing, they had the paperwork to back it up.
There was I spoke with a lawyer on that case, and who looked at it, what he basically said, and I'll give this metaphorically.
Sure.
You remember the Trayvon Martin case?
Of course.
So prosecution it was kind of on their side. The case leaned probably their side.
Right.
They made a huge mistake. They brought in a dummy.
Right.
Put him on the ground and was like banging the dummy's head in Trayvon's being Trayvon, banging his head.
Right.
And what it showed was that George Zimmerman was the guy getting his head banged, and that's why he killed Trayvon. So it was almost like it was like very, very poor counsel from that standpoint of view. Now people see the case come out, it's not guilty, they're up in arms. It's like, well, if you saw that maybe, Dak Prescott threw 7 interceptions, if you saw that stat and the Cowboys lost, then it makes sense, And this, the way that it was explained to me from this lawyer, he basically walked me through, that it comes down to you have 2 lawyers and one can paint a story better than the other.
Right.
Granted, from looking at it myself, when you're going tit for tat against, the I-9s, like you said, they have proof of, the service charge. It's a service charge. They're not putting gratuity there. It all makes sense. didn't, though, go back and pull the curtain out from the server's expectations and make an argument on that. So that was, I think, a big reason why that case went that way. I do think that law is on, it's a little, the foundation's a little shaky on that too. I really don't think that is going to be a set in stone forever on that, because a lot of the information that I've got on this is obviously, I'm making the argument that these servers and bartenders are hired being told the tip's included. Right. And then you have a service charge. Now, granted, on some of these receipts here, I see this over and over and over again, right? So you got, say, let's see if there's a server. Yeah, right here. We'll take out a random one here. Take out a fish called Avalon. Over on
Ocean Drive. Right?
Ocean Drive, yeah.
That's right.
Got a one Zacaba. Service charge is 20%. It says you go all the way down, spend $27.09. The only charge on there, one Zacaba. You have your subtotal and your service charge. I'm gonna show you this in a second.
Let me guess. Let me take a wild guess. $46.
No. $27.09, including the service charge. However, you just have service charge.
Right.
At the bottom, it says additional tip, and it gives you the line for that.
Right.
So to me, as a guest, I'm looking at that and going, additional tip. Okay, so the service charge that's added is the tip.
Right.
Because what does the word additional imply?
Right.
It implies there's a tip. So there's things in that case that I'm like, dude, this is Monday morning quarterback here. But I mean, if you're a guest there, I'm thinking the service charge is tip.
Yeah, I think, listen, especially on a 20% service charge. Now, I mean, there's been times where, if it was, let's say, a 17 or 18% service charge, if the, waiter, waitress, server did a fantastic job, I'll leave extra.
Yeah, for sure.
I'll absolutely, but when you're already charging 20%, listen, it's aggressive. It's very aggressive.
Yeah. Do you find restaurants are open to taking that off if a guest asks?
It's funny. We were just having this conversation. If a guest makes a big public stink about it, they'll take it off. As I think, what's the legalities on it? I think you technically, if you're not okay with the service charge, I believe you can ask to have it taken off.
So you can, and I think us both being in the hospitality industry, for a fact that if somebody's really good, they're just going to take it off. Right. I've seen it being taken off. It's going to be taken off, and that's just I don't think there's a restaurant in the world who's going to be going at a guy and saying, we're going to blah blah blah. It's just not worth it. However, I don't want to give necessarily restaurants this legal advice, but the main argument in the Nurserat case was that it's a service charge and you have to pay it, which is what makes it legal to do it and legal to not give that as a tip to the servers, and the servers can't expect that as a tip because it's not gratuity legally. However, the very second legally that it can be removed and it is now an option, it is considered legally gratuity because it's optional. So if you remove that at all, it's gratuity and a tip.
Right.
Which is the real elephant in the room with restaurants, because we all know that you ask for it, you're probably going to be able to get it taken off right away. If not, another push, they'll probably take it off, which makes it an optional charge, which then makes it gratuity, which makes it illegal to use that money for anything other than gratuity to back to the servers, which these restaurants, man, they're begging to get sued out the ass because they don't realize that, or they think, and this is this is the ones who have been through a class action, which I
Right.
know a few who know this, which is why they'll go to the table real softly. Hey, why do you want to take it off? Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah, well, why don't we get you a round of drinks? Why don't we pay for some food?
Right.
They'll do anything they can before they take it off. And if they do take it off, they'll take it off very, very soft. Not really let the server know. They'll close them out themselves, and then they'll tell the server, yeah, you're good. You don't have to worry about that asshole
Right.
anymore. And they're like, oh, thank God.
Right.
Even though now technically the restaurant's entire portfolio of service charges that they've collected for how long is now susceptible to being viewed as a tip, which now they have to give back to the servers. So there's a lot of, it's interesting because there's a lot of like any restaurant across the board in Miami, I'm sure, has taken off a service charge in the last year, which makes them susceptible to almost a class action against any restaurant in Miami who does take it off, because now it's optional. And if it's optional, you now also have to leave signage up, letting people know. So they gotta be thin line, man.
Right.
But
I think that even with the case of Nurserat, if the service charge doesn't get you, something else will. Case in point, they pulled the service charge move in New York and Las Vegas. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that, a lot of people, even at the opening of Nurserat, New York, were so furious about how expensive the prices already were, plus the service charge, that a bunch of PR companies wrecked them. And I don't think it was a coincidence that Vegas followed suit. And, I think now in Miami, they're on the clock. Because it's just, it's obviously one big corporate team. You're not just, Miami didn't just do so well in New York. And, I think that the whole operation with the service charge is going to catch up to them.
Well, and when I'm going through Nurserat, which is Salt Bay's restaurant, which for people who don't know, Salt Bay's first name is Nurserat, which is why it's named that way. When I'm going through this is the argument, which is why a lot of the luxury restaurants that are doing this and with the service charge implemented, it's not always the best look, because you got a guy like Salt Bay who's got a 20% service charge in, right, which is basically the restaurants going, we need help with operation costs, either paying kitchen staff, rent, supplies, credit card fees.
Right.
A lot of that stuff does add up, but that's why the restaurant industry is as tough as it is. But at the same time, that's the argument. All right, but Salt Bay's selling a Wagyu rib cap for $1,500.
Correct.
And then 20% on that was at another $300.
Right.
So you're at $1,800 without technically tip.
Right.
And this is just a guy that I gotta go through this, some of these cases real quick. In 2019, settling $230,000 with waiters, who were fired for questioning how their own tips were being divided.
For questioning. Right.
And I've seen that in Miami, where if you start to ask about the service charge and how you're paid, all of a sudden, the pool tips, you're starting to decline as a server. You're not getting the checks you thought you were getting in the first place, which were already low to begin with, because that's their way of kind of economically pushing you out, because they don't want to have that.
I never looked at it, but I don't know, maybe you have. Does he charge a service charge in the European restaurants?
Most of them.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, most of them.
Maybe in Turkey or...
Oh, wait, like out there?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Because I've actually interviewed a lot of the street interviews, which was really cool. A lot of them were foreigners. So I was like, well, how do you tip out there?
Right.
And none of them do. I think there was one country, it might have been in Istanbul. It might have been in Turkey, in Istanbul, where I think she said some restaurants do a 10%er.
Right.
But for the grand scheme, most don't have it, and most don't even expect a tip.
Right.
I have seen that here, where people start questioning, dude, they're pushed out. And what's really freaking sad about Nurserat's case with this is you're not talking about Miami locals who,
Right.
you know, are going to go across the street and get a new job or their friends, whatever. These people, he flew in from Turkey
Right.
to work at his restaurant and then effed them over on overtime, fast forward to 2021, sued for unpaid overtime for workers who were required to work over 70 hours a week and even relocated from Turkey, classifying kitchen staff as managers in order to avoid paying overtime hours.
Saw that case. I
Yeah.
saw that one.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, dude, you're flying guys in from your own homeland, man, to work for you. And I know somebody who applied to Nurse Rat a while back when they were first started opening, and this is word for word what had happened. What they were asking for him to do, which was you get 0 PTO until your second year, and you're expected to work 6 days a week. And granted, even if your salary, man, like if your salary, that's $150,
Right.
or I'm not doing it. But what you're gonna get is somebody who's dying to be a manager. They're gonna slave for a year, and then they're gonna leave.
Right.
You know, and Salt Bay makes it even worse, and gets his own boys from Turkey to come over, and then he just irons them right out. Super sad, man. And then, of course, the infamous case we talked about before
Right.
in 2022, the mandated charge. And I mean, this also, you know, Grootman's, a lot of his restaurants, I mean, some of the top notch in the city, you know, I think the service in those restaurants is top notch. I think the aesthetics to the food. I mean, it's great. I mean, Casadona is one.
Casadona, yep.
Casadona was in there a couple weeks ago. Gorgeous place, man.
Yeah, beautiful.
Gorgeous place, beautiful. But you know, he's running Poppy Steak
Right.
and Komodo.
Yep.
You know,
two in the top 100. Yep.
and 2 of the top 100 restaurants in the country.
How about this? They're 2 in the top 25.
Yeah, top 25. I think I
think Komodo's number 6.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think Poppy's number 22.
in the entire country in sales.
Right.
And I'm going down the street, and I start off with my street interviews going like, hey, what's your favorite restaurant?
Right.
Komodo.
Right.
You know, great stuff. But I mean, you know, you're talking, I think in 2022, the list came out, and Komodo's sitting at 33 million in sales,
Right.
charging an 18% service charge.
Right.
And then Poppy Steak is pulling in 23 million, charging a 20% service charge. And
A place that's not big. It's not even
it's
that
not big at
Right.
all. And you know, the argument of it goes to credit card fees, it goes to yada yada yada. In these locations, I gotta call bullshit on that, because you're talking at Poppy Steak, you charge a 20% service charge. You got listed on your menu golden caviar for $3,000.
Right.
And 20%, I mean, that's another $600. You're at $3,600 for that. Now, granted, probably most expensive thing in the item on the list. Everything's not over $1,000, you know what I'm saying? But at the same time, you know, you're taking that 20%, and then what are you doing with it, man? What are you doing with it? You know, I mean,
I think you're paying for the show, but you know what? Like, I can honestly at least understand, you know, the Grutman, you know, Groot situation, because his restaurants are an experience, you know. Why do people order those $3,000, the $1,000 briefcases or whatever it is? It's a show. You know, they want the attention. They want the sparklers. And, you know, I think that's really where it goes to. But again, at least you leave there and, you know, I'm not going to judge. You know, I'm not $1,000 gold briefcase kind of guy.
Yeah.
But
that's Poppy. That's Poppy.
right.
Yeah.
But I get it. You know, at least you know what it's almost like, it almost equated to like going to a strip club. You know, for a few minutes you are the sexiest guy in the room. You know, and once you leave, you're like, you know, you're being cheered on, and everybody had a good time, and it was an experience. And you know, if you have that money, whether you're going to drop it at 11 or you're going to drop it on a gold briefcase, it's a different kind of clientele. I don't think that I think when people go to a Poppy or go to Komodo, they know what they're in for. They're not going to be
they do.
caught off guard. You know, like everybody going into Poppy, they've seen those social, you know, the viral videos, and they're like, that's what I want.
Yeah,
I'm going to be
yeah.
that guy tonight. And you know what? God bless them. You know, you can afford it. Great. You know, but at least you have that experience, as opposed to going to some really shitty places that you have a terrible experience, you have terrible food, nobody knows what's going on, the drinks are shit, and you're paying 20% on top of that.
Yeah.
I'd be more upset about that experience than at least the experience I feel like at least I'm going to get some clicks on social media because I'm flashing a golden briefcase.
Yeah, I mean, very, very touristy and stuff. I mean,
Right.
It's definitely a good time. I mean, if I had money to spend like that, I'd probably do that once in a while or so. As a guest, I'm sure that they gotta be like, wow, when they get the bill because of the service charge on that. You know what I'm saying?
But that's the thing is, who are we talking about? You know,
yeah,
what I mean?
you're talking top. Yeah.
That's because the guys, who are going to Poppy and we're going to Komodo and going to Mila, nobody's going to be sticker shocked. Nobody's going to be caught off guard with, oh my God, you believe that it was like $300-400 a person? Everybody is bringing their Amex that night.
No, they are. The question for you too, because I'd like to know this myself.
Sure.
Those sales, like, for example, I think the list I went off was like 2022, top 100 most independent. Like 33 million from Komodo. Is that including service charge?
I mean, I'm guessing that is probably the gross number of sales. So
right?
It would probably have to be in that number.
Okay. Because
again, I'm not 100%, but if I was a betting man, they're reporting their sales, like what, I don't think, their expenses and what their net is. It's got to be gross. It's got to be gross sales.
Because I'm looking at that number and I'm trying to figure out service charge wise, how much out of that is going back to the restaurant in comparison to the servers. And I'm also thinking too, I mean, the service charge there, looking at the top 100, I mean, you obviously got Mila at number 2 at 49 million.
Right.
You got Joe Stone Crab at 49 million.
I think on the 24 numbers, I think Joe's only beat Mila by $500,000.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's you're talking less than, say, 49,413,190.
Right.
Subtract 49,088,032. Right. I mean, it was
close.
Yeah, very close. Huge difference here, though, that really should be a huge gap in there, is Joe's doesn't charge the service charge. Mila does.
Right.
So Mila is scratching at the door at number 2, and they're charging a 20% service charge, and Joe's isn't, which is whopping, especially considering a lot of these other restaurants on here, most are not charging service charge. The Boathouse Orlando, I mean, you go straight down the list. If they're not in Miami, they most likely don't have the service charge.
Right.
So that's an interesting concept as well, because to me, I'm viewing that as sort of a these restaurants that get on this list that have the service charge, I'm viewing that as an affirmative action, getting onto that list. Almost myself want to put an asterisk next to their names on this that are doing the service charge. If
you know what, that is a great point.
Yeah,
that is a great. Yeah. I didn't even think that's a great point.
Yeah, especially if they're including that in the sales, which I'm assuming that they are.
Right.
Because you're talking. Get a calculator here.
Who was number 3? Was it
the Boathouse Orlando?
Wow. Okay, so top 3 are all Florida.
Yeah. So you're talking.
And does Boathouse charge a service charge?
I don't believe so.
Right.
Orlando, I can't say for sure. If they are, then put an asterisk on them too. So I mean, you're talking 49 million, 88, and 32 times that by 0.20. So if that's included, the service charge at Mila's in that sale price, you're talking 9,800,000. So take that off the top, and Mila's is close to in between 4th and 5th.
Still doesn't suck.
So they're still they're still powerhouse. They're still powerhouse.
Still doesn't suck. And you know what? Like I would definitely find out about if the service charge is part of it, because my personal belief on that whole list is I think there's certain restaurants That's specifically no way they do those numbers, but they really wanted to be on the list, so they put themselves on that list. And then I know of definitely other restaurants that should be on that list that they don't want that attention. They don't want Taxman coming after them.
Oh, yeah,
where
yeah,
they
yeah.
won't absolutely. If
Yeah.
you look, there was actually one year Joe's wasn't even on the list.
Oh yeah,
Because they're like, we don't want to report. Like, if you find out what our sales are, great, but we're not going to volunteer and
No.
So
And it's funny too. Both of Mila and Joe's under 50 million, just under 50 million, 49 million. So there might be something tax wise where once
After
you're
if you
50
hit 50 million, yeah.
then you're
maybe you're in a different bracket.
yeah. So just interesting on that because Joe's top number one in the country don't have the service charge. And then most of the restaurants from Miami that are on this list
Right.
do have the service charge. So it does go to show that you can still make it in that traditional style, without pulling that service charge there on your checks. I do want to get your thought on kind of if you were governor, president, and could make any change to this industry with the tipping service charge debacle, what would it be?
It would probably be now we both are very nervous and like excited about what law will be passed with, this whole service charge.
Oh yeah,
thing.
let me tell you
Right.
real quick. Let me tell you. So I've been in contact with the Congresswoman's office on the we're going to pull the service charge off every check that's under 6 guests. And even if it's over 6 guests, you have to, if somebody complains about it, you have to remove it. So that was original in early March, put out there. Don't know but what happened between now and then, but I'm going to read off a verbatim here for the information I was able to extract from individuals involved with the bill, which is, so the changes made were to establish a operations charge. In the bill, it makes a clarification between a gratuity or a tip and an operations charge. Restaurants must also comply with the statutes to include a notification of this charge on the menu and on the receipt once it's given to the customer. The idea behind this is to create transparency between the customer and the business and to eliminate the issue we are running into by customers not knowing if they're paying gratuity, but otherwise paying for what is now called an operations charge. With this, it's ultimately up to the business to include the charge, but with this clarity, it's the reason that the under parties of 6 language will not be in the bill. Right. So basically, to me, the only thing that's changed is the word service charge goes to operations charge, and have to be more clear. It does say there has to be a clarification between a gratuity or tip and an operations charge, but to me, as a guest, I'm like, what's going to be in that check is going to be something kind of generalized, and it's going to be. I don't think any change actually does happen here, there's no change in this other than the operations becoming the word.
I think this whole thing needs to be regulated from the top down. I think first thing that every server and every restaurant should disclose to server day one exactly where their money goes. I think that you don't know if the server doesn't know where their money goes, you got a fine. Everybody needs to be very transparent. The restaurant needs to be transparent with first the server and let them know, the bartender, let them know exactly where that money goes. That's number one. Number two, I think that, this bill isn't really going to do anything because the majority of tables are 2 and 4 tops. Can we kind of agree on that? So what happens with those people? This is going to, I think that they need to regulate the whole takeout, service charge. I think there's just certain things that need to be regulated. Do I think that service charge needs to be cut out completely? No, because if you are a server and you've worked in Miami, you could not make a living without it. not anymore. Maybe like those I call them the top 1%ers of restaurants, the Joes, the Carbones, the big boys, If you are not one of those guys, you are going to have a very, very, very tough time hiring staff. So, all of that needs to be regulated. Now, again, I get it. Europeans don't tip. But if they cut out the service charge, playing devil's advocate, people are going to lose staff. I've spoken to many servers who cried to me that at the end of the night, 3 tables, numbers were upside down. They wound up owing the restaurant money. Because no matter what, they still have to tip out on sales. So whether one table tipped $200 and the other table tipped $0 and the third table tipped $10, they still have to tip out on the overall sale of that number, which means, too bad. No matter what, it didn't work out. Sorry. So, which one? Now, I know if you're a consumer, obviously you don't give a shit and you're just, I'm not paying anything more than that. And again, I get it. I think if the law passes, I think a lot of people that, let's be honest, let's call them cheap. They're going to start eating at those types of places where maybe they wouldn't have before. Because now, no more service charge? Amazing. Now I can afford to eat at those places and I won't tip. But at least now I could eat there. What happens? What happens to some of those, to the motivation of some of those servers? It's going to be, there's no real answer. And I think that's why this has become such a debate, because unless this gets regulated, this is going to be a never ending debate.
I think I got one. Here.
Hit me.
So I think there's one restaurant in the whole city who I would start the model after. It's the Henry over in Brickell.
Right.
They do automatic gratuity, not service charge.
Right.
Which there's a big difference, huge difference, especially if you're a server, because automatic gratuity goes to you, service charge goes to the restaurant, and they give you what you want.
Right.
They do automatic gratuity, which is a server's dream.
Right.
Bartender's dream, because all of that goes to you. So, and it's 20%.
Right.
So after tip outs and what you're taking home, I think between 15 and 18% yourself, and then you really get a good crowd there. So a lot of times, if you're doing good service and talking to people, they overtip you.
The problem is that's just like Carbone does the same thing, but I call those the top 1%ers. There's over 9,000 restaurants in Miami-Dade County, and the other 98% do not, do business the same way. So, right.
Well, what the Henry does, which is different than they're the only ones who does this out of everyone I've interviewed here.
Right.
So basically, I love this, by the way, because I think it works for the guests and it works for the server. Granted, the restaurant, are they gaining anything money-wise from an extra charge on top of it? They are not, but they take that traditional style. You survive with your profits and you make, and you gotta, be efficient.
Right.
What they do is you get your check here. There's 20% included, which to me, I would say 18% should be included gratuity-wise. I think 20%, little aggressive on it. Is from a guest standpoint, especially too,
right.
Because if anything goes wrong, dude, but they have a plus and a minus here called tip adjustment. So you see the gratuity is included. You see how much you're including in gratuity. And then from a guest standpoint, you can literally write minus $10 if you want to take off, or minus a percentage. So like if the service was shit, you can write to take it off. So basically here is that they're giving you the option to have nothing included.
Right.
And you can up tip, subtract. However, it is on the check. So if you do write minus, you are communicating that you're taking away from the service tip. So there's a little bit of pressure to the guest to tip. I think there should be. I think that unless somebody spilled red wine on your wedding dress, I think that 18% should be every single time. Now here, plus and minus, you can obviously throw more down there, but it does give you that wiggle room to where if you want to go down to 10%, you can. However, there's that pressure, so please don't do it. And you're also going to, that's going to be very intentional to write minus.
Right.
But, you give it up to the restaurant or you give it up to the guest's choice to make that with that applied pressure.
Right.
So the guests or the server and the bartender are getting tipped most of the time. And are keeping that tip. So they're happy campers because when you're getting paid, when you get good gratuity or a high check count and then somebody throws on another 10 or 20 on top of that, man, that makes your day. And then you're going up to everybody like, oh, I'm going to do that again.
Right.
And the service is phenomenal.
Yep.
And then from a restaurant standpoint, talk about costs. You have a server who's lagging, who doesn't give a shit,
right.
who's late. Dude, get the fuck out of here,
right.
dude. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, look at this, man. We're doing 20% on this. I
Right.
mean, I want you to take a look at it because I think it's a very good system. Obviously, the downside to the restaurant is they don't get money directly from it. But I think that practice in and of itself should come to an end unless they're putting it separately. So if you want to keep a service charge on there that goes directly to the restaurant, good. Put that separately at the bottom and the actual percentage. So it says gratuity and then service charge, which there is actually about 2 or 3 restaurants that do this. Biscayne Tavern down here on Biscayne, like 2 blocks north, does that. They have a I believe it's either 18 or 20% gratuity. Then there's like a 4% service charge.
Is that the hotel that just declared bankruptcy?
Biscayne. Well, Biscayne's on the bottom. Who is the hotel above them?
I think it was the hotel that they're in, the B2, right? Is that it, or is that?
It could be. Let me see.
I think they just announced it.
Oh, has a 2% service charge on the bill, 2% resort tax. And then a 20% gratuity. So they got, actually, out of everyone I've gone to, they got the most, 24%, with the server obviously keeping the 20%.
Right.
But, I like that outline. That place that I think was kind of overdue for...
Well, the resort tax is now because of the tourist tax. So that's another thing that they're about to start piling on.
Yeah. I know, which is obviously being passed down to the consumer in some way. That's what people don't get. When you raise taxes, the business ain't gonna be the one paying the taxes. It's the consumer, the little guy, or it's the servers and stuff.
And again, that's the other thing. I spoke to many operators, and even if this law passes, they're like, great, we'll just change it. We'll change the name to something else.
I know. That's what I was trying to communicate as well. Because part of this as well, it would be. In my change on policy here is if you do have a service charge in any capacity, you're due to the same amount of random inspections as you would for like cockroaches and going in where somebody just shows up and says, show me around. Same thing, except with your books.
Right.
And you have to be able to show on hand where that money is going to from that service charge. And if you don't and can't do it on hand, you're hit with fines from the city. Right. And then if like the same way with the cleanliness and the inspections, you get shut down if the finances, somebody can't clearly read from the city. Granted, I hate promoting the city of Miami putting their hands even more into business. It's dumbfounding to me to hear myself say that.
Right.
However, I just from my research and who I've spoken with and what they've said, it's just that's kind of the only thing that I could think of because there's just got to be, I think, the transparency. And also, too, if you want to charge a 50% service charge and you keep all of it, I think you should be able to do that. But the guests and the people who work there has to know where the money's going, I think,
100%.
Because I'm not for take off the service charge. It's just people have got to know where it's going, especially your workers and your guests. So that's kind of
100%.
Would you recommend this to your the plus and minus to any operators though? Because I think this is a great.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's great. I think it's transparent. I think that you could still be a consumer and relax when you get the bill and not stress out and ask, oh, is gratuity included in here?
Yeah.
And adjusting minus. I think it's all part of the whole psychological game. Almost like being at a Starbucks with additional tip type situation.
Yeah.
So you're like, what do I do? But no, I think that is a great system. Do I think that more people are going to use it? Probably not.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you know, they're getting hit with so many different fines and tariffs and taxes and tourist tax that, you know, feeds the homeless, and that it's just you can't make money as a restaurant anymore.
No, I know. And, you know, as a server, if you don't have, the thing is, if you're a server and you don't have anything included, you know, and you do get shafted after shafted after shafted, you're going to leave because you're not making money. You can't survive working at it.
Right.
So you're going to leave, and then you're going to get the place new servers, and that is legitimately dangerous when you have new servers going into busy restaurants, because now you're sitting down paying all this money. The server has no idea what's going on, what's on the menu.
Right.
You're talking allergies out the wazoo that could really, I mean, I've seen some shit in some restaurants,
Right.
man. You're talking inches
Right.
from that person eating something that they have a high allergy for.
Whether
and
it's a
you're
nut
catching
or
it.
a shellfish or, right. 100%.
Yeah, you're catching it by, oh my gosh,
Right.
dairy allergies by an inch. And that guest didn't even know. And the reason that it was caught was because somebody who has been there for a while knew better. And they saved it. And people just don't know. I mean, if I got a major allergy, I'm not dining any place,
Right.
because I just know how that is. And with built-in gratuity and some of this stuff, you do alleviate a lot of that. And from a guest standpoint, if you are not tipping 18%, you know, I don't think you're doing your part as a person, because you're really, you know, you're knocking down a little bit into the foundation there,
Right.
because that's where the service charge came from originally, was people not tipping from Europe in South Beach, and then nobody can keep a wait staff when they're making $0. So then they hit 20%, and now you're getting punished because nobody else tipped behind you or ahead of you. So
Right.
That's where the service charge came from, low tips. So
And the per hour changes. If you're with the service charge, I think it's even less that you make per hour on like your
yeah, because
per
they're doing
hour
tip
wage.
credits and
Right.
yeah. So Felix, I appreciate you coming on to me and sharing all this. I'm sure I'll see you down the road.
Daniel, you're the man, man. Well, anytime you want to shoot the shit, bro, I'm all about it.
Sounds
We'll
good.
do
Thank
it.
you, man.
Thank you, brother. It was a pleasure.